Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Reinsurance Podcast. I am your co-host, Jared Lee.
And I'm Ben Rose. And oh, sorry, you wanted to say hello first. Go on.
I want to say hello.
Say hello.
I don't get to see you in person that often, so I feel I always have to say hello.
Well, hello, Jared. And it's not just me that you get to say hello to today.
It's true.
Because we have a special guest.
We do.
We have Mark Bennet, who is VP of Global Business Development for ACORD. Welcome, Mark.
Welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be on board.
Yeah.
Excited to have you here. And today's subject is one in which you are a distinguished expert, which is ACORD itself. So I don't know whether that's a good place to start. Could you just give us an idea of what is ACORD?
Sure, yeah. So, I'll be careful with the expert phrase. But yeah, so 4 years with the organisation now. So who are ACORD? So ACORD are a industry-owned organisation focusing on creating a global set of standards for the insurance and reinsurance market to place an insurance risk, to move money, to move claims information, regardless of its class of business, from property and casualty through to global reinsurance to specialty risks in the Lloyd's of London market. Life and annuity business is agnostic of that. So ACORD have been providing for 36,000 insurance organisational members now for 50 plus years access to those common standards by way of a membership that people subscribe to on an annual basis. So that's every major broker, insurer, reinsurer, software vendor, marketplaces like Lloyd's of London. The industry associations around London are part of our ACORD membership. That's, in a nutshell, ACORD's DNA. Yeah.
That was incredibly concise and impressive.
Oh, yeah. I've done it a few times now. Yeah.
Thanks for giving us an intro. And I guess I'd love during this episode to dive into everything that's happened in the past, everything that you're doing now, things you're looking forward to in the future. But as a starting point, I mean, wow, like 52 years and 30-something thousand different organizations involved. Like, how did you get to that as an organization? Where did it come from originally?
That's a good question. So the ACORD's DNA stems out of the North American property and casualty marketplace, where the way in which business was traded before ACORD existed was very much everyone had their own different data formats that they were sharing data with. Lots of manual orchestration between brokers or agents in that marketplace to carriers to reinsurers. So through ACORD's DNA, they introduced what's known as a standard, which was rendered on a PDF document that's still in existence today, called an ACORD form. Mm-hmm. So that could be everything from a proposal form through to issuance of a certificate of insurance. It's rendered on a PDF document where the data elements that are captured on that PDF document are licensable to the ACORD members via ACORD, but they're standardized in the way in which it's exchanged. So therefore, they're not mandating, but they're making sure that people are entering that data in a consistent fashion every single time. It's not like the global reinsurance and specialty market where ACORD standards are digitally enabled to enable people to share data via API, but in the P&C market where this ACORD originated from, there's exchange on these ACORD forms that still exist to this day, 800 live different ACORD form templates that are exchanged across that marketplace. It's regulated in the North American P&C to follow the ACORD standards.
Yeah. You'll see ACORD really transcend the entirety of the sort of insurance universe, whether it's up to reinsurance where we play or down into sort of local agency filling out ACORD forms by hand. Yeah. When I first started in the industry, that exposure to ACORD happened very early on when you have the ACORD forms that when some of this insurance systems, for any of our insurance listeners, you hit sort of prepare the documents and it prints out, it takes the data you've entered in,
absolutely,
and it drops it into all the PDF and it prints that thing out, which you then, certificate of insurance gets emailed to your client, and it's on that sort of core form.
And it's kind of, because they've been around for so long, these ACORD forms, it seemed to be almost it's that reassuring stamp of approval. Yeah, I'm definitely on cover. I've got my ACORD form, certificate of insurance. Yes, I'm on cover for my liability risk or whatever that, auto, homeowners, whatever it might be that you're on cover for. So yes, absolutely. And that's still, as I said, very much in existence today, those ACORD forms and the way in which that P&C business is exchanged. Yeah.
Very exciting. And I think one word that's really key to bring out, I mean, in any conversation about ACORD, but especially for listeners who are less familiar, is that word standards. I guess what is the alternative to standards?
Yeah, sure. So I like it. I'll try and dumb this down. So what an ACORD standard is, in the simplest terms, is the same way we're enjoying this conversation in the English language. It's the same. The ACORD standards is the same for an insurance transaction. It enables everyone to know what they need to send in the way in which they're going to send it, They know that the receiver knows what they're going to receive in the standard they're going to receive it in the same way that I'm speaking to you in English. I know that you're going to respond back to me in English, not Spanish. And if you were going to speak to me in Spanish, I'd have to do a translation layer my end to comprehend what that Spanish message was, translate it to English. I say English back to you. That just creates a lot of friction and time, cost associated with that insurance transaction. By everyone speaking that common language, in this example of English, it enables that sort of three-way data exchange in a more seamless, straight-through fashion. Reducing the time it takes to get quotations, improving the efficiency around payments, improving the customer experience around claims, which ultimately is what we're here to serve as an insurance marketplace, helping customers with when it all goes wrong.
Yeah. When you started, going back to Ben's sort of first question, when you started with the beginning of that journey, what were the core issues that were trying to be solved? Obviously, there's this additional cost and friction involved with that sort of misalignment of language or standards. When you sort of sought out to sort of tackle that, obviously our industry is so large and so nuanced and so specialized. What were sort of the initial use cases that you were sort of leaning into? You talked about sort of core P&C stuff, but were there specific areas that you felt this is breaking here? We need to solve this better.
So the North American marketplace is very different to the rest of the world in so much as, yes, it's one country mass, but that is actually it's 50 countries all wrapped up into one. Each state has their own regulatory requirements, and it's very much, and that's where ACORD take away some of that pain associated with transacting business. So if you're transacting business in New York, it has different regulations to transacting business in California, as an example. So what ACORD did, not only are they, as you said, improving the operational efficiency of everyone having a common language, but they're trying to abstract the complexities associated with the regulatory requirements around each individual state in the P&C market. So that was one of the key founding pain points that ACORD, or the originalities of ACORD in the P&C market in the US, was there to resolve.
And with your fabulous languages analogy, dare I say, I was going to say we had thought about doing an analogy battle during this episode. I feel like you've already given a really good one, which is exciting. Do you want to see how that compares to our analogies? I don't know if you had another one in store as well.
Oh, crumbs. No, you got me on the spot now. You guys keep going, and then let's see how I handle it. Yeah.
Right. So, Jared, our task is to compete with Mark's linguistic analogy.
Do you want to go first?
Just to frame what ACORD is and means to the industry.
So we always do analogy battles. Not always, but in most episodes we like to put in different games. Analogy battle, one of our favorites. I thought a bit about my ACORD analogy. Do you have yours?
Oh, God, you go first.
Okay.
Because otherwise you'll play it down and be like, oh, that's so much better than mine. I just thought of mine now, like, whilst I was listening, and it's terrible. But,
half the strategy is playing to Cordy's emotions, because what Cordy votes is how do I get Cordy's vote for my win. So the analogy battle the analogy that I came up with ACORD was time. No, but what I mean by that is time standards. So most people don't realize that we actually agreed to how time worked, like in the late 1800s. And it was only in the advent of the train line that you actually had to agree on what time was. Because at the time, in the era, every town set local time with the sun at the high point as noon, and they sort of worked their own time there. But there was no need to agree the time in London versus the time in Glasgow or anywhere else in the world. Only at the introduction of trains did it actually matter that we agreed what time trains were coming and going, and that began to happen. And time as a standard began to be introduced by cities that had trains going through them. So I sort of think of ACORD in the same way of when everything is localized, when everything is small, when everything is intrastate, and it's all this little version of it, no one really cares, right? It's when you're trying to trade across state boundaries, across geographies, across languages and jurisdictions, then you need to go, okay, well, this is now harder.
Yeah.
When it's just our local town, like no one cares what I think noon is what you think noon is. It doesn't matter. But when you start growing, then you begin to have this constraint there. And that's kind of how I thought about where ACORD sits in our universe and how it exists going forward.
See, another beautiful
Yeah, I think that's really elegant, because a lot of the insurance members of ACORD, some of these are global brokers, like the likes of Aon, for example, hundreds of offices across the globe. So they have to look at this as a proper global industry set of standards. So yes, absolutely. We originated out of P&C for North America, but then through donation, which is a key part of ACORD, people donate standards to ACORD. So the standards are forever evolving, forever modernizing from technology at the time through, and we have to support the technology that still people are on. Some people are still carving ACORD standards into granite and stone. That's fine. We'll still support those guys as well as the most modern API-enabled users. But then through kind of moving into reinsurance and particularly into the specialty classes, that really took us into a global sphere of standards focus. So we have to support our members in Australia right the way through to specialty markets like Lloyd's of London, through to our US carriers and the mum and pop shops, in the kind of more different states.
All right, Ben, you're up.
I know. I feel like I'm at a disadvantage with the guest giving a giant stamp of approval on your analogy.
Yeah, it was great. It was a good one. Yeah.
Can you at least mark him down, Cordy, for implying that London and Glasgow were in the different time zones? He's impartial.
Time zones now.
This is true. Okay, well, fine. Let's see if I can sort of compete with a very visual analogy, which is actually related to quite soon I'll be getting married, and we've recently started some dance lessons to try and make sure that we do a first dance that's reasonably entertaining, so that should be quite funny. And I see ACORD as kind of the dance teacher, and not a dance teacher for like we're doing just the two of us, but for like a whole dance class, because if you didn't have a dance teacher, it's like a children's disco. You got like Munich Re in one corner doing the cha-cha-cha, and Swissery doing the tango.
I would love to see this. This would be absolutely brilliant. Yeah,
Aon just like flossing by herself in the corner. You got all these things going on, and it was like, "This guys, you got to dance together. That's the only way this is going to work." And the dance teacher's there to clap along, and I say 1, 2, 3, left, right, left. Come on, GC or whatever ACORD is really that dance teacher role, I think, for the industry to set out the standard, to say that this is what we're all going to dance together, so that it actually looks good when we interact, and so you don't all stand on each other's feet and bump into each other when someone's trying to salsa from one side of the room to the other. I guess that's kind of the end of my analogy before I trail off.
I like the visual of Aon flossing in the corner.
As usual, Jared does a deeply profound analogy.
Mark got the win today. Cordy gave the crown to the language analogy.
No, that was a good one. But I think the only thing just to kind of quote on that would be, yes, absolutely, dance teacher to kind of guide people to harness the standards in a consistent fashion. But where there is the enablement of standards, there's one thing about having a common language. There's another thing about how we actually exchange that common language with one another. So historically, ACORD very much left that in the kind of the domain of each individual member to work out their own story. So they'd all be using different systems, have their own different messaging capability, where they're leveraging a digital standard enablement. So for our global reinsurance and large commercial standards, GRLC as they're called locally, those standards are digitally enabled. So they enable people to share data without any ACORD forms, as we mentioned in the US P&C market. It's all done via electronic messaging. As I said, historically, people were left on their own accord, that's my pun for the day, to sort out their own proprietary kind of capability to integrate. What ACORD now do is to drive greater standard adoption, particularly in marketplaces where their penetration is lower, and that's because they're less mature marketplaces, or they just haven't got embraced standards in the same way that continental Europe, North America, and London, for example, have done so. Is we offer a technology arm of ACORD called ACORD Solutions Group that we created about 10 years ago to help to drive connectivity of participants on an industry-owned capability, so an API enablement. But it's interoperable. So if you're using a legacy system that can only submit messages in different kind of more legacy formats, it's no problem at all. We'll connect you to it based on your existing capability. And we brought together, as part of ACORD, we have over 200 vendors in our community. We brought together the core insurance policy administration and integration partner vendors in a community called our Licensed Integrator Partners, LIP for short, for which Supersede are part of that community. Thanks for your support. So as part of that is we are educating and enabling those vendors to offer digital standards as a service effectively. So they have a module now as part of their policy administration system for brokers, insurers, reinsurers, core platforms like yours, to offer people to send and receive ACORD structured messages electronically, rather than historically they'd have to work out their own capability themselves. That's expensive. They'd have to speak to their vendor. The vendor would have a change request process to go through, etc. It's, again, creating a barrier to adoption. So we're now reducing that barrier by having an industry-owned capability.
Yeah, I'll continue on from the dance teacher analogy. I also think ACORD does a really good job of having sort of support available as you're going into that journey, as you as a firm looks to say, we want to do more with this, as we want to leverage this to trade with our partners more effectively. It's very much the resources they have available through partners and colleagues of yours to help them on that journey allows it to be like, oh, this is what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to have this great first dance, whatever this is, like help. And they're like, oh yeah, so here's all the people, here's how this all works, here's how we can, it's very, very highly engaged there, which is, I think was essential for getting us to the end result that we're all looking for.
It's really good to hear, because at the core of ACORD, we are also an educations company. The R&D in the ACORD letters is research and development. So we're forever kind of leveraging our industry thought leadership and also helping members come onto this journey. We've just started an initiative with a group of our members called Rushlacon, who specialize in reinsurance and large commercial risks. There's about, they've been established now for over 10 years. All of the major brokers, insurers, reinsurers that support the reinsurance and large commercial marketplace. They're writing about 7 million transactions per year through the ACORD GRLC standards in a non-bureau capacity. The London Market Bureau is adopting those same standards as part of the Blueprint 2 modernisation, which is very exciting. One global standard, back to the message earlier. But where we've, in partnership with Rushlacon, we've looked at one of their implementation groups that historically had a very low penetration of adoption, and that was in Italy. And in partnership with Rushlacon, we, together with ACORD, harnessed the global reinsurance large commercial standards, and together with ACORD Solutions Group, the technology arm, adopted our ACORD data exchange platform called ADEPT for short, another acronym for the industry, to centralize as a country solution how reinsurance and specialty businesses is transacted from an accounting claims perspective. Historically, Italian brokers and cedants would submit an invoice to a reinsurance broker or to a reinsurer via email. It was an attachment, PDF attachment, that then had to be rekeyed in. But through the implementation of ADEPT, we've enabled those brokers to either connect to the API via their vendor or log into the portal, or where they don't have any appetite, brokers or cedants, don't have any appetite at all to do either of those options, they can then actually we can digitize their originating documents into ACORD structured messages on behalf of the receiver. So Swiss Re, for example, would receive the messages in the consistent fashion every single time, regardless of the sender's maturity to send that transaction. Sure. So yeah, that's a really good example of kind of driving adoption of the standards through the technology in a localized market in partnership with our members.
No, it sounds really impactful, especially when you look at like the complexity of these types of risks. It's no longer sort of really basic vanilla stuff. We're trying to figure out how do we introduce some element of standardization or agreement with business that is never the same. It's always very nuanced. We've talked a bit about sort of the pains of sort of no standards at all, and we've talked about the benefits of ACORD. Is there anyone else sort of in that standards place that you sort of bump into? Is this sort of a Blu-ray HD DVD sort of situation, or VHS Betamax scenario? Trying to navigate the audience age group here. I don't TikTok, Insta, I don't know. But is there a competing sort of area for alternatives to what you guys are trying to do? And how do you guys see that panning out?
That's a great question. So honest answer is probably no, but there are in other marketplaces. So let's take UK General Insurance as an example, where ACORD don't really have a play in that market as yet. There is an existing standard called Polaris that very much is the industry standard for UK personal line risks, so car, bike, homeowners, that type of risk, whereby we have they're members of ACORD. We have a strong affinity and partnership, and wherever standards are evolving, we always make sure we're kind of joining the two together. So where ACORD's standards start and stop in the specialty market, and where the Polaris standards kind of go up to kind of small commercial-esque level, there's always a kind of a foggy region in between that we're always trying to make sure that we're bridging that pain point around. And where applicable, we'll harness the Polaris standards, and of course, where applicable, we'll create new standards on behalf of our Accord members. And we're doing that right now, actually, as part of an initiative in and around London, but it's not restricted to London. But we're looking at risks like cyber, we're looking at risks like war and terror, those types, where in certain levels of that type of risk, they're auto-rateable, but historically they're trading in a very non-auto-rated fashion. So they're effectively, again, exchanged via email. Broker submits a quotation request to bunch of carriers all on the BCC line of an email. Each of those carriers then enter that data into the rating engine, generate the premium, respond back individually in lots of different languages, some French, some English, some Spanish. That then needs to be translated by that originator of that message. Let's say it's a broker for simplicity. And we're offering effectively an auto rate quote bind capability that harnesses the standards, creates new class of business where Accord didn't have a standard for them. And it leverages the technology of Accord Solutions Group to drive that API enablement between that originating sender and the rating engines. So we're trying to drive new standards where there's weak points. But in answer to your question, yes, Polaris would be a good example where we're currently not in that marketplace. They've got a very established standard. We collaborate with those other groups.
It's super interesting, and I'd love to come on to the API sort of now and next piece in a minute. But how has it been just trying to corral all of these? We said 30-something thousand organizations around the world to try and use the same standard, and also there's a bit of a behavior change there sometimes from the email and attachment and so on. Like how do you, or where do you even start to go and try and get so many different voices on the same page? Especially, I guess you mentioned, Rushlicon, you're trying to bring together titanic organizations like these huge brokers and reinsurers. Where do you start?
It's hard is the short message, and that's why Accord exists. Ultimately, is to be that herder of cats, for lack of a better phrase, is to bring everyone together. So there's one thing, bringing people together, that's painful. There's another thing, getting people to agree on a common set of standards, that's very painful. But painful in a way of going, everyone is working in different ways, in different geographies, with different unique requirements. Ultimately, let's not forget, this is still a competitive marketplace. These entities are for profit in their originations. They have shareholders to fulfill. People feel there's secret sauce associated with the way in which they trade business. Therefore, their differentiation is more, is valid, and they need to do things in a certain way. So Accord have a host of standards working groups that our members have come together to help harmonize the way in which certain standards are used across the globe. That is hard, but we make sure that we've got representation from the largest, kind of most influential players associated with those particular markets and those classes of business to help us on that journey. But we also support large and small. We always make sure we've got representation from new entrants into the market. And then there's kind of bringing our members together. So Accord, again, you can't account manage 36,000 insurance organizations. You can't do it. With Accord by its nature are not for profit. So we obviously make sure that we're running as lean as we physically can. So we bring our members together for industry thought leadership events. We've got one coming up in autumn called the Accord Connect Conference that enable a mass education across our members of Accord's investments in the standards, Accord's investments in the technology group, and where those members can harness those capabilities. But it's not an easy feat, for sure. Rushlicon is a great example whereby Accord, in partnership with Rushlicon, so Rushlicon was instigated by some of the biggest reinsurers and biggest reinsurance brokers. That's expanded out into 7 now implementation groups. There's a steering committee over the top of it. Accord help facilitate their global engagement on the Accord standards, so they're helping to drive standard adoption by way of practitioners. Accord is supporting them with the actual standards, but also the technology, as for that Italy example earlier. But it's Rushlicon themselves, members themselves, who are actually trying to expand the global adoption of the Accord standards. It's not just Accord in itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting as well because by its very nature, you have this desire for other Accord members to want their counterparties to be Accord members.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you get a bit of a benefit from that,
Totally
right?
agree.
Especially as Ben mentioned, you have the sort of some of these behemoth firms, Aons and Swiss Re's. If they're saying to their partners, like, you should be supporting this as well, because it's going to make us easier to do business and be a partner for you. So you probably benefit a bit from that as well.
Without question. So that age-old strategy, the best sales strategy in the world, is fear of missing out. So sometimes whereby you start to say, well, how are they doing it today? Well, why can't we do that? You can, but then historically, as I mentioned earlier, that let's use the example of a broker trading to a reinsurer. The reinsurer goes to another broker and says, hey, well, I'm receiving electronic accounting messages from Aon, for example. Why don't you, Mr. Broker, also do that with us? That broker then goes, right, okay, I want to do this. Where do I start? Well, I'm going to need some form of technical capability to do so. I need to speak to my vendor. I need to understand the standards, and there's a barrier to adoption. So that's where ACORD comes to the table. That's what you said, Gerard. Help them understand the standards, and then help them enable them by the technology. And hopefully, their core vendor, their system vendor, that broker, is part of that license integrator partner program and are already connected to offer electronic standards as a service. So again, just reducing the barriers for those guys to come on board. But it should, for every participant, the age-old conversation was always, is it only valuable for the receiver? Are they receiving transactions quicker? What's the benefit for the originating sender, the broker, the cedent, whoever that might be, the originator? It's beneficial for everyone involved, because fundamentally, from the originator who might be representing the end insured, wherever they sit in the value chain, they're answering their customers' questions quicker, they're getting claims paid faster, they're getting invoices settled faster, they're getting quotations quicker. The whole transaction is beneficial for everyone in the value chain to having one common industry standard.
And I think implicit in the fact that you've been collectively doing this for 50 years is that ACORD is also quite a big sponsor of the innovation that's enabled that to improve as well. I mean, I know Superseed were a beneficiary of the ACORD Insurtech Innovation Challenge about 3 years ago now.
2019.
That we won
I remember it. I facilitated the London round.
Yeah, which was very exciting. But
it was a great pitch, and it was a showcase pitch. It stood out as like you were hands down the winners there. I'm not paid to say that. Everyone who's listening is pleased to know. But you were a standout pitch for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, it was the early part of the journey, which is always fun. But as Ben said, ACORD is always sort of, as you said, research and development being sort of the R&D, and ACORD is pushing where does the industry, not only what can we be doing better now, but like how do we facilitate more of this? How do we accelerate the growth in the efficiency by which this industry trades, full stop. You're talking, going back to the sort of the bigger firms that you have, about what percentage of, how do you think about market size? How do you think about the percentage of business that flows through ACORD standards?
Yeah.
Obviously, it's probably quite complex because you have the P&C market, which is enormous in nuance. You have reinsurance, which is a different beast, more consolidated. How do you think about market share and what your growth ambitions might be for the next few years?
So for the US property and casualty market, it's virtually we're the mandated choice. Effectively, you have no choice as part of the US regulation. Then if you look into kind of global reinsurance and large commercial, again via that Rushlacon community, it represents the biggest brokers, it represents the biggest reinsurers and the cedents in that marketplace. So again, we're the dominant force within that. I wouldn't have the statistics at the top of my head, but we are the kind of the standard effectively, which is fantastic, because that's what the market needs to go for. And if you then took markets where we're moving into to support on this, such as the Lloyd's of London market, it's a great example. Historically, wasn't a fully fledged ACORD because it's a specialty market and reinsurance market. It wasn't fully fledging leveraging the ACORD GRLC standards for that marketplace. It's part of the Blueprint 2 modernisation. They will be for placements into the Lloyd's of London through the core data record. That's following an ACORD placing message format. That's called the GPM, ACORD placement message. Again, it's leveraging that as the CDR going into the market, and then for accounting claims transactions out of the bureau, the new bureau services being delivered by Lloyd's of London and the partners around it. Again, focusing on leveraging the ACORD GRLC standards for accounting and claims, the EBOT and ECOT, which are the same standards used by that Rushlacon community in the non-bureau marketplaces. So again, helping to provide those cost efficiency savings as one global standard, because these organizations have syndicates. They have brokers who represent Lloyd's of London market as well as non-bureau. So again, due to the size of these organizations, that having one global standard makes everyone's lives easier. There's not a mapping activity associated with the trading business in London. There shouldn't be such a differentiation. It should all be one consistent global standard, which is what's going on around London at the minute. Yeah, so lots of modernisation effort there.
That's certainly something we can relate to. I think when we were first figuring out, how on earth a reinsurance placing platform would work, we were like, well, it can't have Londonisms because by its nature, reinsurance is global. You don't want to do half your panel in one way because they're in London and the other half of the panel in 4 other different ways because they're in X geographies and
historically, that's how the vendors market was set up. They were London market specialist vendors, and then there were rest of world, specialist vendors. But we're definitely seeing a blurring of lines now, which is fantastic. Or non-bureau guys moving into bureau, or vice versa. And we like to think that the standards are helping to drive that, and having one consistent way to exchange data. And again, it's just driving people to act more globalized rather than localized.
Definitely. I think one thing we're really excited about actually is as sort of the ACORD Adept project matures from, I guess you've done accounting and settlements like thriving at this point, and we're now getting to the placement side of things.
Kind of going backwards, right? But as always, again, this is the for-profit industry, so they're following the money, which is always focused on accounting first. But yes, no, I think what we're doing with Super C, I think is fantastic. So ultimately, we're trying to drive more exchange of treaty placement information as part of the first phase, what we're doing with you guys, traffic to Supersede, and equally enabling it far more consumable fashion for your carriers on the receiving end of your Supersede platform to be able to consume that data in a consistent fashion. So again, we're just trying to drive more automated treaty placements via wonderful platforms such as yours, harnessing an industry-owned standard and an industry-owned capability to exchange that data. So absolutely, I think very exciting project what we're doing with you.
Yeah, likewise. I think we found this a lot in our journey as well. The concept of APIs is still gradually creeping into the industry, and people aren't really sure where to start. A lot of these big firms keep innovation budgets, but they don't want to put it all into something that's, as we said, just going to work in London or just going to work for one line of business. So when ACORD starts to bring APIs to the fore, it's like, oh, hang on, this is actually worth investing in because it's going to be a global API. Everyone's going to be able to use it, and that's why we as Supersede are also very excited, because we know that if you've got brokers using Supersede, those placements will be shared in a way that looks the same as placements shared via AB Connect or GC Marketplace, and the other way in as well. If you're receiving deals as an underwriter on Supersede, they'll all look the same. They'll all come in that beautiful standardized fashion. So it's a very exciting partnership, I think, that we can look forward to there.
Absolutely agree. And I think it's part of what we're doing together. Again, it's just market awareness and understanding, because it is a new technology. It is a new approach. This is a very mature, ultimately by its very nature, a risk-averse marketplace. We are insurance organizations at our core, right? We're always forever looking at risk and managing risk. So therefore, when it comes to new technologies, we've all seen the kind of, blockchain come in, can go. Some people won, some people lost. So wherever there's kind of new technology coming into the marketplace, ultimately, it's always very good to help really educate from a business perspective. What is the business value this drives to you, Mr. Broker, Mr. Cedent, Mr. Reinsurer? What does this mean for you? So that's why, again, where the community factor comes in. So hypothetically, an Aon can therefore exchange the kind of experience with another broker to go, look, this is what it means for me. This is what it's going to mean for you, etc. It's an interesting time for sure as we kind of move into this next technology chapter. People shouldn't be scared of new technology. They should be willing to embrace it, but equally, we need to be interoperable with different people at different levels of maturity of integration. So some people are ready; they've got wonderful systems. They can leveraging an API integration is an easy thing for them. Some people are on self-built systems that just can't integrate to an API. So you need to facilitate the connectivity to those existing estates where applicable, so to drive everyone's kind of connectivity onto the services. So we call ourselves interoperable via that Adept platform. Connect anyone to anyone, no matter their integration maturity.
I thought that was a master stroke of strategy in some ways, to be able to tackle legacy in that way. Actually, the ability to say, right, we're going to build something that is not just a castle in the sky that people will get to eventually, but actually something that is a castle in the sky with a really nice drawbridge to all the people who are still using.
Exactly. Some of them might be more swing bridges, absolutely, into more legacy estates. But nonetheless, you just need to provide that. Otherwise, you're just instantly creating a barrier to adoption, which ultimately we're owned by the industry. We have to, back to my reference earlier, some people are still carving stone, carving into granite ACORD standards, so their use of it. So we need to facilitate everyone in their journeys. Yeah,
indeed. I know we're coming up on time pretty soon. I did want to disambiguate, is that a word?
It's a word now.
Thing that should be though, right? I like it. If it's not,
one thing that could have been unclear. If this is your first reinsurance podcast episode, you might be really confused because we've talked a lot about ACORD today, and there's also been somebody that we keep referring to called a cordy. So Cordy is our podcast producer and has nothing to do with ACORD, the organization which today's episode has been focused. So just wanted to disambiguate.
Yeah,
disambiguify. We can work on that. Standardize that word.
Indeed. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mark. It's been a great conversation. We've enjoyed it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been a pleasure, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.